Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're on to chapter 13 of Shooting the Moon. Anyway, where we left off, we had a little flashback chapter, and she was kind of flashing back to when he got back from basic training from the army, and off he went to the airport, and then he was going to be going to California and then to Vietnam. So the last thing that she kind of writes about is my brother was going to war, just like we'd always dreamed of. All right, now we're at chapter 13. The colonel was in the backyard when I got home from Cindy's. He liked to sit out there before dinner to admire all of his botanical accomplishments. Usually, he didn't do more than gaze reverently at his flowers, since my mother hated anyone to come to the dinner table dirty. But today, he was underneath a forest of tea roses, pruning. I sat down in the grass beside him and plucked a few blades. I didn't know how to say what I wanted to say. I needed a strategy. Remember what she needs to talk about? See if she can get her friend out of going to Vietnam. I don't know. I needed a strategy, but I didn't have one. I knew I was about to ask something impossible. How do you go about doing that? Hand me my pruning. Hand me my pruning shears, would you? The colonel called from where he was kneeling deep beneath the leaves. She's getting out of control down here. I passed the colonel his shears, handle first, the way he taught me years before when I'd wanted to be his garden assistant, just like TJ. It had been a boring job that consisted mostly of fetching the colonel glasses of ice water and every once in a while mixing up a brew of fish emulsion and manure tea. I'd quit after a few Saturdays. That tea stunk to high heaven. Sitting back, I took in a deep breath and plunged in. You think the war's going to be over soon, sir? The colonel pulled his long frame out from underneath the roses. It's gone on as long as it needs to, he said, sitting up and wiping some crumbs of dirt off his cheek. But it'll take some time to get out of there now. Okay, here comes the next question. Do you think it's right for the army to send someone to war whose brother has already been killed in war? Was this person drafted or did he enlist? Enlisted. I hope that was the better answer. Remember, enlist is when you volunteer. Drafted is when they call up your number and then you get picked out. An enlisted man has chosen the military and he's responsible for fulfilling his duties of his enlistment agreement. It might be taken into consideration that his brother had been killed, I must say, but that doesn't mean he won't be sent if he's needed now. The colonel stood. Pieces of mulch clung to his pants leg, old combat fatigues he had worn around on weekends. He leaned down to brush them off. You hear men enlisting after their brothers have been killed in war because they want to have a crack at that enemy now. Revenge. I don't know if that's a good reason to enlist or not, but it makes for some pretty motivated soldiers. I don't think Private Hollister's after revenge. The colonel gave me a look. Hollister? You're a rec center buddy? Is that who you're talking about now? Private Hollister heard that they were sending radio operators from the 1st Signal Troop to Vietnam. I stood up immediately and wished I was taller. The colonel might take me a little more seriously if wasn't such a runt compared to him. But he thinks it's going to be really hard on his mother if he goes, since his brother died there. And he says you're the one who signs the orders. I figured if you didn't sign his orders, he wouldn't have to go. It wasn't the number one argument I'd been hoping to make, but it laid the cards on the table. I'm asking you not to sign his orders, sir. I finished. I know it goes against all Army protocol, but it would mean a lot to me if you didn't sign them. Well, you're asking me not to sign his orders? The colonel's voice was flat, disbelieving. I nodded. The colonel scratched his head, then brushed back his hair with his hand. Who do you think I am? Tell me that, sport. Who do you think I am now? Do you think I'm Santa Claus? You used to be, remember? I was scrambling, trying hard as I could to win the colonel to my side. Mom told us that you used to get up on the roof and jingle bells and stomp around like a reindeer. The colonel didn't say a thing. He sat down in a lawn chair in the middle of the yard. He rubbed his eyes, put his hands down on his lap, then stretched out his legs out and shoved his hands in his pocket. He looked vaguely confused, like he wasn't sure what he was doing in this particular backyard on this particular Friday afternoon in this particular century. Back when TJ enlisted, when it was all a done deal, I made a call to an old buddy of mine now, the colonel said, sounding like he was about 100 years old and 100 miles away. Just got his first star. Used to be Colonel Sudner. Now he's General Sudner. Next time I see him, I'll have to salute the guy. He's at Fort Jackson, Adjutant's General's Corps, personal command. I asked him to make sure TJ didn't get shipped over to Vietnam, to pull whatever strings he could. Man, he chewed me out. Up one side and down the other. Dexter, you damn so-and-so, he says. You want your son kept out of Vietnam so somebody else's son can go out there and get himself killed now? The Sudners were at Fort Leavenworth, I said. I couldn't focus on what the colonel was telling me. I couldn't quite take it in, the fact that the colonel had tried to pull strings to keep TJ out of Vietnam. That went against all protocol. It went against everything he'd ever told me about the Army, the way of doing things, honor, duty, sacrifice. Wasn't that what he'd been preaching to me all my life? But all I said was, I remember Colonel Sudner. He has a scar on his cheek from where a dog bit him. The colonel didn't seem to hear me. Maybe I ought to be ashamed. Sudner thinks so, sure thinks so, but it's a worthless war, and I don't want any son of mine anywhere near it. He looked up at me. I'd let someone else die for TJ. God forgave me, but I would. It's a worthless war? My mouth hung open. The colonel was calling Vietnam a worthless war. We got into it for the right reasons now, the colonel said, leaning forward and looking straight at me, like he needed me to believe him. That's what all those anti-war types don't understand. They don't understand that the Soviets and the communists, Chinese, are a real threat to our security. We can't let them have Southeast Asia now. The colonel sat back in his chair and frowned. Problem is, we don't know what we're doing over there. We're in way over our heads. It's a jungle war against an enemy that's just plain smarter than we are when it comes to that kind of fighting. If we had any sense, we'd admit defeat and get out of there. Save a lot of lives that way if we did. I sat down on the grass. The tips of my fingers and toes felt numb. Did you tell TJ that? I told him over and over. He wouldn't listen. He's 18 and thinks he knows everything there is to know. Does he know you tried to keep him out of Vietnam? You're the only one in this family who knows that now. Your mother doesn't even know. The colonel pushed himself out of the chair. I thought college would keep TJ out of the war, but I was wrong. I thought I could keep him safe, but I was wrong about that too. He began walking towards the house. He looked old to me, his shoulders sagging, his head low. Before he got to the back door, I called out to him, Colonel? He didn't turn around, but he stopped. Will you help? Private Hollister? The question hung in the air, suspended between the whir of cicadas and the lonely coo of a morning dove. I hugged my arms to my chest as if I needed to hold myself. Despite the heat, I felt a chill run through me. I'll think about it now, the Colonel said as he disappeared into the kitchen. That night, I spread out TJ's Vietnam photographs on my bed. The soldier in the wheelchair, the bandaged stump on what used to be his right leg pointing straight at the camera. A terrified child, naked to the waist, hands to his ears, running down the road. A helicopter hovering in the distance. The soldier on the stretcher, the wound soaking his bandaged chest. A hollowed eyed GI staring at his camera. The skin burned and scarred across his cheeks and his forehead. I left them all in Colonel's desk, fanned out like hands of cards, where he would find them in the morning when he sat down to drink his coffee. And that leaves us for chapter 14. Let's see if she can save him and not send him to Vietnam. All right. Till next time. All right. Starting to heat up.